Good evening, everyone. Today is March 29th, 2022. We're going to begin episode 42 of The Last Admiral. And the chapter heading on page 350 is entitled Rolling Seas, Ships, and Clinging Fire. Captain William Kidd had prepared the harbor defenses well. Commanding from the poop deck, he displayed his curly red hair proudly, for he much desired that his enemies should know whose hands wrought their destruction. His face was noble and proud, with a large prominent nose and intense blue eyes. He wore no beard or facial hair. His white shirt was baggy and ruffled beneath a black captain's coat with gold buttons. He wore no armor while in command, and his only weapon was a saber sheathed beside his left hip. Admiral Nelson and the fleet commanders had worked for days, preparing the most deadly trap that they could conceive of with so little preparation time. Less than a quarter of their active warships were left moored in the harbor, with two ancient, decommissioned vessels anchored as decoys and shields for the real threats lying in wait in the waters behind them. Kidd knew the capability of his enemy from past encounters, and he had suffered many losses at the hands of the Sea Fox. His bait had to be substantial. Everything had to appear real, or they would risk the chance of allowing their most feared nemesis to escape. The rest of Nelson's armada lay in wait offshore, hidden behind the long curve of the northern peninsula. Anchored there, they were invisible to ships approaching from the southeast, and only a short sail from the harbor itself. When the 11th Fleet appeared, bursting from the night like Tiamat's host, their hilltop forts were fully garrisoned and on high alert. They divided their emplacements in order to provide overlapping fields of fire between the open sea, the harbor, and its mouth. They had tested their ranges, and more dummy ships to mark them. Steel shot, hooks, and shrapnel were loaded to destroy sails, and great bales of hay, saturated with tar and oils, filled others in order to bathe the enemy ships in flame. Kidd's own ship was equipped with new weapons purchased at great expense from the far eastern lands of Shamroon. 10 great cast-iron guns, capable of firing heavy steel balls almost a mile, made his ship unique in all of Fermanagh, and he intended to use them. King James had ordered new defenses constructed around the forts, beaches, and fields in preparation for the expected attack that he believed would arrive from both the land and the sea. His engineers strategically placed pits, spiked obstacles, deadfalls, and rolling log traps nearly every likely avenue of attack, and distant outposts supplied hundreds of additional troops. They were ready to defeat an army, and more than ready for the Sea Fox when the attack began. Captain Kidd commanded the harbor defenses, windlass, the woods and hilltop forts, and Admiral Nelson and Vice Admiral Collingwood led Eitzel's fleet at sea. He was the anvil, and they were the hammers. None of these Dragonian scum, murderers and pillagers, would escape alive. The adventure galley commanded the center in their small formation. Countless moored fishing boats, trawlers, sloops, skiffs, and rafts shielded his ship from the initial brunt of the attack. When the Sea Fox appeared, he intentionally allowed them the first attack, and then, when his nemesis was fully committed and engaged, his own opportunity appeared. "Archers," he commanded, "loose!" 10 of his best sailors then stretched stout yew-bows, knocked with well-clothed arrows dipped in pitch, and their actions aflame. Aiming high into the night sky, they released their harbinger of doom, It was then that Etzel's defenders unleashed a continuous report of fireworks that illuminated the harbor and the nearby coastline with the light of day. No more would the Sea Fox and his crews be able to hide in the dark and use their superior night vision against them. Kidd accepted no insubordination among his ranks, and he once struck a former engineer with an iron-shod pail as punishment for a minor insult. The sailor died the following day. The act had left a lasting impression on his crew, and likely guided Admiral Nelson's hand in selecting him to lead the brutal fight that was now unfolding. The Adventure galley was capable, weighing in at 284 tons. She was fitted with 3 tall masts, fine sails, as well as a full complement of oars. Her weaponry included 4 ballistae, fore and aft catapults, 10 cannons, 100 armored knights, and 150 sailors. He handpicked his officers from among the sailors whom he considered the most loyal to him. Those on-board conditions made his ship formidable, his command absolute, and his orders swiftly obeyed. The wind was landward and building, off the forward bow and enough to maneuver. "Hoist sails," he bid. "Conning, steer us on the wind, and bring us abreast of Terribilis for a broadside." "Aye, Captain," the helmsman said. Closing the distance, Captain Kidd came within sight of his adversary. Terribilis was backing away from their stricken dummy ship. Countless knights who plunged into the water were now struggling to stay afloat, and those in heavy armor were certainly lost. The Sea Fox offered him a brief salute before commanding his archers to fire upon them. "Two can play at that game, Admiral," Kidd declared. "Archers, loose!" Sailing ahead, they wove their way between ships and into the heart of aggressive action. His knights, hurling lifelines, helped castaways where they could. But now, finally, their enemies were at their mercy, and centuries of pent-up hatred were fueling their taste for blood. Longing to board the enemy ships and fight, an acute battle fever began to boil in their blood. And the incident with the pail and Captain Kidd derived from a historical altercation between Captain Kidd and his gunner, William Moore, on the 30th of October, 1697, from David Cordingly's Under the Black Flag, The Romance and the Reality of Life Among the Pirates. And the term conning or cunning is the act of directing the helmsman in steering a vessel. So I took that historical incident and added it to the book. Okay. The Sea Fox had held on to his initial advantages of a high tide and a following sea for as long as he could. But now, as he tried to pull astern and turn to windward, nature was against him. If they could engage and delay them for 30 minutes or more, then Admiral Nelson would have them enveloped in an impenetrable blockade. Between the hilltop batteries and the fleet's combined might, they would obliterate the Sea Fox and his despised command. Over half of the 11th ships had rammed decoy vessels throughout the harbor, but some had penetrated further and struck active warships. Both the Labelle and the Gentleman were now listing as water rushed in through their staved-in hulls. The 2 sinking vessels were somewhat closer to shore and within range of a long swim. His captains knew their duty. In sacrificing their ships, they did not intend to go down with them, but rather to make the enemy sink with theirs. Redpool's trap was unexpected, but not ill prepared for, and these warriors, above all other foes, would fight hard until the end. Fighting ships tangled, resulting in boarding and vicious close-quarters fighting. Arrows filled the air, and massive balls of flaming destruction streaked down from the battlements. Chaos reigned. Smoke and fire obscured friend from foe. Off the port bow, the coxswain reported. The Hind is going down. Steady as she goes, Kidd directed. Prepare the lifeboats. Gunners, move to your stations. The Golden Hind was precious minutes away. He could see his comrade, Sir Francis Drake, leading an assault onto the deck of their destroyer. The Hind. And obviously, I've chosen captains from history, ship's captains, admirals from the Battle of Trafalgar, and put them in the book, in the battle. It seemed like a logical way for me to get a lot out of already familiar characters to people that are interested in history. And that way, it makes it easier to keep track of the myriad of characters needed to flesh out a gigantic naval battle such as this. At least, I hope that's what happens. Okay. The next chapter is called The Hind. Boarding hooks, Captain Drake commanded. Hooks away, echoed his first mate. The dragon ship had rammed them just forward of the starboard beam. The enemy drummer beat a violent rhythm, urging their oarsmen to pull free of the wreckage. The sea wasted no time in rushing in. Sir Drake knew that his ship was lost, but he and his crew were not finished. If they could secure enough lines to their enemy's ship, then they might pull them down along with them. All hands, he cried, board and attack. Valiant sailors then climbed and swung from the rigging or danced across hasty ladders, spanning the gap between the ships. The embedded ram provided a bridge for some, but the water around it was now aflame with burning oil, and the roll of the ships tipped many sailors into the deadly sea. The best swimmers among them struck out beneath the waves in search of clear waters, but such openings were few, and the span of one held breath was short when the heat of battle flew. Some chose to stay down rather to encounter the fire above them, and these slipped down into the silent deep. A few lucky ones escaped by climbing onto unscathed nearby vessels or swimming to the distant shore. Drake's sailors were courageous fighters. Many of his crew never made the crossing due to the consummate skill of the Draconian archers. Even those swinging across in the lifelines were not safe from their deadly barbs. A boarding assault seemed impossible, but just then a well-ranged missile struck the dragon ship hard by her stern. Instantly, a massive blaze erupted, threatening the mainsail and blotting out the sky with black smoke. Drake and his fighters wasted no time in securing a portion of the deck on the starboard bow. "Follow me, lads," he shouted. "This may be the Hind's final day, but she'll not go down alone." The Hind sank faster, and the dragon ship lurched violently, knocking the majority off their feet. Pitched forward by the head, it made standing difficult, but those sailors that could met each other bravely, knowing that the only outcome short of victory was death. "Form a skirmish line," Drake commanded, "and have at them." And the term by the head is the condition of the ship, when the head of the vessel is lower in the water than her stern. If her stern is lower, then she is by the stern. From Lane, page 48. And list is the inclination of a vessel to one side. Heavy list to starboard means much tilted over to the right. Okay, the next chapter begins with Captain Jack Carradine. Sir Drake knew not upon whose deck they had landed, but it was clear that neither ship would survive the night. The poop deck listed hard toward the starboard bow, and Captain Carradine steadied himself against the mizzenmast in order to avoid being thrown down. Beyond middle-aged, time had etched his face, and yet his body was sound, concealing well a vast internal strength. Fit beyond his years, a lifetime spent at sea had honed his muscles. Tall and lean, His face was handsome. His hair was long, thinning, and tied back in a single ponytail. His uniform was heavy with ocean spray and the clinging soot of smoke. He grasped his scabbard, unfastened and empty, and in his left hand. His right hand held his rapier, its hilt cast of silver, its handle dressed in stingray's skin. He moved with the utility of a soldier who had spent a lifetime involved in martial training. A few steps ahead of him, his coxswain, Archibald Shaw, desperately clutched the ship's wheel. Armed with the short sword and dagger of a Dragonian marine, he was clothed in the thick, treated black leather favored by the light infantry. His salt and pepper hair was short-cropped in a utilitarian cut. His lively, bright blue eyes appeared haunted as images of fire, carnage, and dying sailors danced across them. Behind him, waves of withering heat washed forward from the aft fires. Their only hope was to swiftly dispatch their enemies and transfer onto another friendly ship. "The ship is finished," he said in the stern. Matter-of-factly, that was his way. "The tiller is gone, and we can't stop the fires." "And the ram is trapped," Carradine noted, looking forward. "We're going down." Their ship's rigging, entwined inextricably. He thought of giving the command to repel boarders, but it was hardly necessary, because fighting was everywhere. They had to win swiftly, or all hands aboard would be left to the mercy of the burning sea. Widening pools of burning oil, launched from the hilltop castles, dotted the entire harbor. Falling overboard meant terrible burns and the likelihood of a horrible death. "This is the wandering monk's last battle. Now we fight." "I am with you, sir," Archibald said with a sword in his hand. "Stay with me. If we can secure the ship, then we may still have a chance to save the crew." "Aye, sir," he replied. "First mate," Carradine shouted amidships. "Sir, Lieutenant Apollo Weathers," answered from the listing gunwale. Some of you might remember Apollo. Carl Weathers. Might ring a bell. "Sir," Lieutenant Apollo Weathers answered from the listing gunwale. Fully equipped, Apollo was tall, physically perfect, and athletic. A dark-skinned man from the deep southern region of Shantou. His eyes were brown and bold, and his hair was short and black. Danger did not suppress his spirit, it rather emboldened it. "See to it that no one remains below decks. Give the order to fight to the last man." "Aye, sir," Apollo replied. Rushing back through a curtain of smoke, he was soon out of sight. Lesser warriors would have folded beneath the weight of desperation's futility, but these Marines were anything but. Rushing headlong from one danger to the next, through smoke, spreading fire, and arrows hail, they engaged the crew of the Golden Hind. "There, Captain," Archibald reported while pointing with his sword. "The Furman have the forecastle." And if anybody knows Archibald Shaw, anyone who's seen Jaws, you might know the actor I speak of. Okay. "Let's lend a hand," Carradine boldly said. "Marines, form a skirmish line." Draco Bellum's roll had slowed somewhat, steadying the deck at an incline of about 15 degrees. The deck was slippery, but navigable, a bit like fighting on a moving hillside covered in shifting debris. Marines began leaving their posts to join him, crossing the expanse of the ship toward the pitched battle near the prow. Carradine's Marines were among the best swordsmen in the Queen's Navy, and their capability had allowed the Marines to hold the line, even though Drake's sailors outnumbered them. Flames completely engulfed the stern of the ship, and smoke was pouring from every porthole and hatch. Spying the firmish captain, he applied the full weight of his arms, fencing skillfully alongside of his coxswain. They killed 6 sailors before they came face to face with the enemy leader. Carradine saluted with his sword, as did Sir Francis. A burly, firmish knight rushed in to take Carradine on his right, but Archibald intervened, crossing swords and dueling in a vicious exchange. Archibald was an expert. The enemy knight was taller and easily twice his weight, but not quicker, and he was far less talented. Clashing arms, they sparred and circled, searching each other for some weakness, the outcome of their duel uncertain. Drake's fencing skills were flawless. Wielding a heavy cutlass in his right hand, he held a fencing cloak in his left. Sweat bathed his prominent brow. His face was lean and determined looking, with a straight nose, inquisitive eyes, a well-trimmed short beard, and a mustache of brown. A black bandana secured his hair. His clothes were of fine cloth, with a tunic vertically striped in broad bands of red, gold, and black, and a baggy sleeved shirt in the style of the kingdom of Highwall. His pants were well tailored and tucked inside of tall boots. He was the spitting image of a noble naval officer. Observing his enemy, he quickly surmised that their styles of fighting were similar and their training equal. He began their duel, straight thrust, overhead slash, parry, stab, and riposte, his feet, waist, and body balanced in perfect harmony with the roll of the dying ships and at one with his blade. Carradine worked hard to match his aggressiveness. In an instant, he had adopted Drake's own rhythm and speed. Fighters on all sides of them began to fall one by one in a near-even exchange of death. At times, other combatants drew near, interrupting their duel and forcing them to face new foes, but always they returned to engage each other. That's where we'll leave off on the top of page 359. We'll come back and see who wins the battle, Sir Francis Drake or Carradine. And Highwall, is a footnote, is the name of King James Redpool's kingdom, including Etzel and surrounding lands. That's the kingdom of Highwall. All right. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed episode 42 as we get into the thick of the Battle of Etzel. Have a great night.